After my friend left, I went into the kitchen and told my wife, "Sit down. We need to talk." Those 8 words changed everything. My name is David, and what I discovered that night didn't just end my marriage. It shattered everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved for 15 years. But before I tell you how it all unraveled, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this story has twists you won't see coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me take you back to the very beginning. Sarah and I met during our sophomore year at State University. I was buried in accounting textbooks at the library when this incredible woman with paint-stained fingers and wild curly hair asked if she could share my table. She was studying art, working on her master's thesis about emotional landscapes. I was instantly captivated, not just by her beauty, but by the way she saw the world. While I saw numbers and logic, she saw colors and feelings and everything. Our first date lasted 14 hours. We started with coffee at 2 p.m. and ended up watching the sunrise from the campus bell tower, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up in a small farming town where her artistic dreams were considered impractical. I told her about my family's expectation that I'd take over their accounting firm. We were opposites in every way, but somehow that made us perfect together. We got married right after graduation in a small ceremony in her parents' barn. The reception was magical. Sarah had painted these enormous canvases that served as backdrops, and fairy lights were strung everywhere. Her wedding dress had tiny paint splatters on it from a last-minute touch-up she'd done that morning, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. For 15 years, we built what I believed was an unshakable life together. We bought a charming Victorian house on Maple Street, the kind with a wraparound porch and big windows that Sarah said would give her perfect natural light. We converted the detached garage into her dream art studio, complete with skylights and built-in storage for her countless canvases and supplies. Our routine was comfortable and predictable in the best way. I'd leave for work at the accounting firm at 7:30 a.m., kissing Sarah goodbye as she stood in her paint-splattered robe already planning her day's work. I'd come home around 6 p.m. to find her either in the studio completely absorbed in a painting or in the kitchen experimenting with some new recipe she'd found online. She'd greet me with paint in her hair and that brilliant smile, and we'd cook dinner together, talking about our days, our dreams, our plans for the weekend. Sarah had built a respectable reputation as a local artist. Her specialty was large-scale landscape paintings that somehow captured not just how places looked, but how they felt. She had regular clients, interior designers, local businesses, a few wealthy collectors who commissioned pieces for their homes. Her work had been featured in several regional galleries, and she'd even won a few local art awards. She'd always been somewhat secretive about her client relationships, but I respected that. Artists and their patrons have unique relationships, she'd explain when I'd ask about a particular commission. These people are opening their homes and their hearts to my work. They don't want their personal business discussed over dinner. It made sense, and I trusted her completely. But looking back now, I realized that trust had become a blindfold I'd willingly worn. The changes started so gradually that I almost didn't notice them. About 10 months ago, Sarah began receiving more phone calls during our evening time together. At first, it was just occasional, maybe once or twice a week. She'd glance at the caller ID, smile apologetically, and step into the other room. "Sorry, honey," she'd say when she returned. "You know how demanding some clients can be. This businessman I'm working with, he's commissioning a series of paintings for his corporate headquarters. Very particular about every detail." The calls became more frequent. Then came the text messages during dinner, something that had never happened in our entire relationship. Sarah would hear the notification, quickly flip her phone face down, and offer that same apologetic smile. "He's very hands-on with the creative process," she'd explain. "Wants constant updates on the progress. I know it's annoying, but this commission could really boost my career." I began to notice other small changes, too. Sarah started working much later in her studio, where she used to wrap up by 7 or 8 p.m. Suddenly she was out there until 10 o'clock, sometimes 11 at night. When she'd finally come in, her hands would be covered in fresh paint, her clothes splattered with colors. "Lost track of time again," she'd laugh, heading straight for the shower. You know how I get when I'm in the zone. But something felt different about these late-night sessions. Sarah had always been passionate about her work, but there was a new energy about her, an excitement that seemed to have nothing to do with the actual painting. Then there were the clothes. Sarah had always dressed casually. Jeans, comfortable sweaters, clothes that could get paint on them without worry. But suddenly, she was buying new outfits. Sexier clothes, a black dress that hugged her curves, high heels she claimed were for networking events, lingerie that was far more elaborate than anything she'd worn in years. "I'm trying to be more professional," she'd say when I commented on her new wardrobe. "This big client has connections in the art world. There might be gallery showings, networking events. I need to look the part." But the gallery showings never materialized. The networking events were never mentioned again. The business trips started about 6 months ago. In 15 years of marriage, Sarah had never traveled for her art. Her clients came to her, or she delivered pieces locally. But suddenly, she was taking overnight trips for client meetings. "He has offices in different cities," she'd explained, packing an overnight bag with more care than she'd ever taken for our own vacations. "He wants to see how the paintings will look in each location before making final decisions. Always overnight, always alone, always to cities just far enough away to require a hotel stay, but close enough that she could claim it was a day trip that ran late." My friend Marcus was the first person to voice what I was desperately trying not to think. We'd known each other since college, and he'd been the best man at my wedding. Marcus had always liked Sarah, but he was also protective of our friendship. We were having our usual Thursday night beers at Murphy's Tavern when he asked the question that changed everything. "Dave, when's the last time you've actually seen any of Sarah's recent work?" I opened my mouth to answer, then realized I couldn't. When was the last time I'd been in her studio? When had she last shown me a finished piece or asked for my opinion on a work in progress? She used to love sharing her art with me, explaining her techniques, her inspiration, her challenges. "She's been keeping this big commission under wraps," I said weakly. "Wants it to be a surprise when it's finished." Marcus nodded slowly, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "And these business trips? Have you ever met this client? Talked to him on the phone when he calls?" I hadn't. In 15 years of Sarah's art career, I'd met most of her regular clients. I'd helped her deliver pieces, attended gallery openings with her, celebrated big sales together. But this mysterious businessman, the one who was supposedly transforming her career, remained completely invisible. Drop by the studio unannounced. Bring her lunch or something. That conversation planted a seed that grew into full-blown surveillance. I started paying attention to details I'd been unconsciously ignoring. The credit card statements showed charges at restaurants I'd never been to, upscale places in nearby cities, always during her business trips. There was a new perfume she'd started wearing, something expensive and sultry that was nothing like her usual light floral scent. Most telling of all was her behavior after these studio sessions and trips. She'd come home and immediately shower, even if she'd supposedly been in meetings all day. She'd be simultaneously energized and distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. The phone became her constant companion in a way it never had been before. She'd take it with her everywhere, to the bathroom, to get the mail, to walk our dog Pepper. Previously, Sarah had been the type of person who'd leave her phone charging in the bedroom for hours without thinking about it. And then there was the laughter. Late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her talking quietly on the phone in the bathroom or out on the back porch. Not the comfortable, familiar laughter I knew, but something different. Giggly, flirtatious, intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago. Sarah had been in the studio all afternoon, and she'd come in around 6 p.m. to start dinner. She seemed distracted, almost giddy, humming under her breath as she moved around the kitchen. Her phone was charging on the counter when she announced she was going to take a quick shower before we ate. "I got paint in my hair," she said, though I hadn't noticed any paint on her when she walked in. That's when it buzzed. A text message appeared on the lock screen, and the preview was visible for those few crucial seconds before it disappeared. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Beautiful." Same hotel as last time. With shaking hands, I took a photo of the message with my own phone before it vanished from the preview screen. R was not a demanding art client, not a gallery owner or business contact, but someone who was booking hotel rooms to meet my wife. Someone who called her beautiful and had done this before multiple times, based on the casual tone of the message. I sat at that kitchen table for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, staring at the photo on my phone and trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe R was a female friend planning a girls' night. Maybe there was some context I was missing, but I knew better. Deep down, I'd known for months that something was wrong. I'd just been too afraid to face it. When Sarah came downstairs in a fresh outfit, not the paint-splattered clothes she'd been wearing before her shower, but one of her new dresses and those high heels, I knew where she was going. "I need to deliver a painting to a client tonight," she said, avoiding my eyes as she grabbed her purse and overnight bag. "He's leaving town early tomorrow, so it has to be tonight. I might be late, so don't wait up." She kissed my cheek, a quick distracted peck, and headed for the door. "Which client?" I asked. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. "The businessman. The one with the corporate offices." "What's his name again?" Another pause. "Richard," she said finally. "Richard Morrison." Richard. After she left, I did something I never thought I'd be capable of. I got in my car and followed her. Sarah drove across town, but not toward any business district. She drove to the downtown Marriott, the nicest hotel in our city. I parked in the structure across the street and watched through my binoculars, a pair I'd bought years ago for bird watching, but had never used. She walked into the lobby carrying her overnight bag. No paintings, no art supplies, no client materials of any kind. 25 minutes later, a black BMW pulled up to the valet station. The man who got out was tall, probably in his mid-40s, with silver-streaked dark hair and an expensive suit. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors open for him, to being the most important person in any room. He handed his keys to the valet and walked into the same hotel my wife had entered half an hour earlier. I sat in that parking garage until 2 a.m., but neither of them came out. The next day was torture. I went through the motions at work, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every spreadsheet looked like gibberish. Every client meeting felt surreal. All I could think about was Sarah and this Richard Morrison together in room 412 of the Marriott. Sarah came home the next evening acting completely normal. She talked about her day in the studio, asked about my work, mentioned that she was thinking about planting tomatoes in the garden this year. She was either a phenomenal actress or she'd completely compartmentalized her double life. That night, Marcus came over for dinner as he did every few weeks. Sarah made her famous lasagna and opened a bottle of wine. She was charming and funny, asking Marcus about his new job at the engineering firm, laughing at his stories about his eccentric coworkers, watching her perform this perfect wife act while knowing what I knew was surreal. This was the woman who'd held my hand through my mother's cancer diagnosis, who'd surprised me with a weekend trip to the mountains for our 10th anniversary, who still left little love notes in my lunch bag. How long had she been living this double life? How many hotel rooms had there been? How many lies had she told while looking me straight in the eye? After Marcus left, I stood in our kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we talked about having children someday, where we'd planned our future together, and watched my wife load the dishwasher. She was humming softly, the same song she'd hummed on our honeymoon in Italy 15 years ago. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that everything was normal, that I'd imagined the text message, that there was some explanation that would make all of this make sense. But then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it quickly and I saw that expression again, that secretive smile, that look of anticipation that had nothing to do with me or our life together. That's when I knew for certain. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd built my entire adult life around, was in love with someone else. And I was the only person in this triangle who didn't know the rules of the game being played. "Sarah," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Sit down. We need to talk." The transformation was immediate and telling. Her face didn't show confusion or curiosity. It showed guilt. Pure, unmistakable guilt. The kind of expression that comes from knowing you've been caught red-handed. "What do you mean?" she asked, but her voice was already shaking. She knew exactly what I meant. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken of her text message. Her shoulders sagged like a balloon losing air, and she gripped the edge of the counter for support. For several long minutes, we just stared at each other. 15 years of marriage, and we'd become complete strangers. "How long?" I asked. She moved slowly to the chair across from me like she was walking through water. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. 10 months. While I'd been bringing her coffee every morning and asking about her day, she'd been planning secret meetings with another man. While I'd been researching destinations for our upcoming anniversary trip, she'd been booking hotel rooms with someone else. "Who is he?" "His name is Richard Morrison," she said, and hearing her speak his full name made it all horrifyingly real. "He owns Morrison Development. They build luxury condominiums. He contacted me about commissioning artwork for one of his new properties." She told me the story in broken pieces like she was pulling out shards of glass. Richard had come to her studio 8 months ago to discuss a potential commission. He was recently divorced, charming, successful. The business meeting had turned into lunch. Lunch had turned into dinner. Dinner had turned into drinks at his hotel. "It just happened, David," she said. But even as she spoke, I could hear how calculated it all really was. The overnight business trips weren't impulsive. They were planned weeks in advance, coordinated with Richard's travel schedule. The locked studio wasn't to hide paintings. It was where they'd sometimes meet when a hotel wasn't convenient. She'd been living 2 completely separate lives with the organizational skills of a professional spy. "Do you love him?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. The pause before she responded told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know," she said, but her eyes said, "Yes, I love you too, David. I never stopped loving you. But with Richard, it's different. He makes me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible." That conversation lasted until dawn. There were tears, accusations, and desperate attempts from both of us to figure out if our marriage could survive this betrayal. But some wounds cut too deep to heal, and some trust once broken can never be rebuilt. Sarah moved out the following weekend. She rented a small apartment downtown, taking only her clothes, her art supplies, and 15 years of shared memories that now felt like elaborate lies. The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks later. But the story doesn't end there because life has a way of serving up its own justice. I found out the truth about Richard Morrison from the most unexpected source, his ex-wife, Margaret. She contacted me 3 months after Sarah moved out, having heard about our divorce through the small network of people who knew both couples. We met for coffee, 2 people bonding over shared betrayal, and Margaret told me everything I hadn't known about the man who destroyed my marriage. Richard Morrison was a serial cheater. Sarah wasn't his first extramarital affair. She was just his latest in a long line of married women he'd pursued and conquered. Margaret had divorced him 2 years earlier after discovering he'd had at least 5 affairs during their 12-year marriage, always following the same pattern. He'd identify a married woman in a vulnerable profession, artists, real estate agents, interior designers, women who worked independently and had flexible schedules. He'd approach them with legitimate business, charm them with expensive dinners and gifts, then gradually seduce them into believing they were the great love of his life. The affairs typically lasted between 6 months and 2 years. When Richard got bored, or when the situation became too complicated, he'd simply disappear, block their numbers, cancel his business accounts, sometimes even relocate his offices to a different city. "He collects married women like trophies," Margaret told me, her voice bitter with experience. "The challenge isn't just seducing them, it's destroying their marriages in the process. It makes him feel powerful." Sarah's great love affair ended exactly as Margaret predicted. About 4 months after our divorce was finalized, Richard's current wife, his 3rd marriage, discovered the affair with Sarah. But unlike me, Linda Morrison was vindictive. She threatened to expose Richard's business practices to his investors and clients, to publicize his serial adultery in ways that would damage his reputation and his company. Richard chose his business over Sarah without hesitation. He cut off all contact immediately. No explanation, no goodbye, no forwarding address. One day Sarah was planning what she thought was their future together, and the next day she was completely alone. She tried calling him, emailing him, even showing up at his office building. His secretary had been instructed to tell her that Mr. Morrison was indefinitely unavailable and that all future contact should cease immediately. The last I heard about Sarah, she was living in a studio apartment in the rough part of downtown, waiting tables at a chain restaurant to pay the bills. Her art business had collapsed when word got out about the affair. It turns out that reputation matters enormously in creative circles, especially in a small city where everyone knows everyone. The wealthy clients who'd once commissioned her work didn't want to be associated with the scandal. The galleries that had featured her paintings quietly removed her from their rosters. The local art community, which had once embraced her, turned cold and distant. Sarah had gambled everything: our marriage, her reputation, her career, her financial security, on a man who'd never had any intention of building a real life with her. She'd been just another conquest in his long history of destroying other people's marriages for sport. As for me, I'm rebuilding my life piece by piece. Some days are harder than others. There are still moments when I see a painting in a gallery window and think about calling Sarah to share it with her. There are still nights when I wake up reaching for someone who's no longer there. But I've also discovered things about myself I never knew. I've taken up hiking, something Sarah was never interested in. I've joined a book club, made new friends, even started dating again, carefully, cautiously, but with hope. I've learned that betrayal, while devastating, doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you're more aware of red flags, more protective of your own worth, and more intentional about the people you allow into your heart. I've also learned that the person you trust most might indeed be the person hiding the biggest lie. But more importantly, I've learned that you can survive anything, even the complete destruction of the life you thought you knew, and emerge stronger on the other side. The house on Maple Street has new owners now, a young couple with a baby on the way. I drive by sometimes and see toys in the yard, fresh paint on the shutters, life beginning again in the place where mine fell apart.